The grand assembly hall buzzed with laughter, a chorus of alien voices echoing through the vast chamber. Scholars, generals, and philosophers from a dozen species had gathered, their focus set on the peculiar beliefs of a relatively young race, humans. A six-eyed historian from the Vrax Dominion gestured dramatically with his tendrils. They believe in gods that walk among them, in warriors who return from the dead, in spirits that watch over battlefield. Imagine the arrogance, believing they matter in the vast, indifferent void. More laughter. A reptilian warlord from the Krilth Empire smirked. And their myths of heroes. Stories of men standing alone against entire armies, defying fate itself. It's nothing but self-indulgent fantasy. At the edge of the gathering, Captain Elias Voss sat motionless. The only human in the room. He had heard it all before. The mockery, the dismissal. Aliens with centuries, even millennia, of history saw humanity as primitive, desperate to believe in something greater than itself. They mocked the myths, the legends, the idea that humans could achieve the impossible. Another scholar, an avian creature with shimmering blue feathers, waved a wing. Even their most sacred stories of war defy logic. Battles where a single soldier turns the tide, where an outnumbered force prevails against the overwhelming odds. Absurd. The laughter grew. Someone turned to Voss, eyes gleaming with amusement. Tell us, human. You've fought wars, haven't you? Do you truly believe in these tales of gods and revenants? In warriors that refuse to die? Voss exhaled slowly. The metal of his prosthetic fingers tapped lightly against the armrest of his chair. His scarred face remained unreadable. He could feel the weight of their stares, their expectation of another human shrugging off the myths as mere stories. Instead, he smirked. You have no idea what you're laughing at. The room fell silent. The amusement in their eyes flickered, uncertainty creeping in. The Krilth warlord leaned forward. Enlighten us, then. Voss sat up, rolling his shoulders as if shaking off a weight that had been there for too long. He looked around at the assembly, at beings who thought they understood the universe, who thought humans were just another primitive species clinging to old fears. You think our myths are lies, he said. That's because you don't know the truth. A pause. The silence in the hall grew heavy. Then, he leaned in slightly and spoke, his voice quiet, deliberate. There was a war, he said. One the universe has chosen to forget. One humanity refuses to speak of. Because if we did, he looked each of them in the eye, his smirk fading. You wouldn't be laughing. Voss let the silence hang for a moment longer, letting them feel the weight of his words. Then he spoke again. There was a time when we thought like you. That myths were just stories. That warriors couldn't rise from the dead. That gods didn't walk among us. He exhaled. Then we met something that made us wish those myths were real. The tension in the room shifted. No one laughed now. The war wasn't against an empire or a species. It wasn't fought over land or resources. It was against something wrong. Something that shouldn't have existed. His jaw tightened. Something that didn't just kill. It erased. A murmur rippled through the assembly. The Vrax historian frowned. Erased. Voss nodded. Planets went dark. Not destroyed. Not conquered. Just gone. No wreckage. No distress calls. No evidence they had ever been there at all. He looked up, eyes hard. Imagine looking at a star chart and realizing entire colonies had been wiped from existence. That the people who lived there, the history, the memories had never been. Some of the aliens shifted uncomfortably. The Krilth warlord scoffed, though his voice lacked the earlier confidence. Impossible. Voss ignored him. At first, we tried to fight the way we always had. Fleets, ground forces, orbital bombardments. Nothing worked. Our weapons passed through them like smoke. Our ships vanished the moment they engaged. It was like fighting a shadow. He clenched his fists. We were losing. Fast. The avian scholar spoke, voice hesitant now. So how did you stop them? Voss's expression darkened. We adapted. Not with technology. Not with strategy. He let the words sink in before continuing. We dug into our past. Into the things we feared. The monsters from our oldest stories. The myths you all mock. A deep breath. And we became them. The room was utterly still. We called them revenants, Voss continued. Soldiers who weren't just trained, they were reforged. The things we fought didn't fear death, so we gave them something worse. We turned men into living myths. We made them disappear from records, erased them from history. No names. No pasts. Just purpose. The Vrax historian swallowed. What did they do? Voss's eyes were distant now, as if looking at something none of them could see. They fought in ways that defied everything we knew. They moved through space like ghosts. Their weapons didn't just kill, they unmade. He exhaled. And it worked. The Krylth warlord growled. You're telling us humans survived by turning into legends? Voss's gaze snapped to him. Cold. Unyielding. I'm telling you, he said, voice steady, that we won because we stopped being human. No one spoke. No one dared. Voss let the silence stretch, watching as the weight of his words settled over them. Then he continued. There was one battle, he said, voice measured. One that changed everything. He flexed his prosthetic fingers. We had tracked them to a place that shouldn't have existed. A void between realities. The revenants were sent in, a final mission. We knew we wouldn't all come back. The avian scholar shifted uneasily. What did you find? Voss's eyes darkened. Not life. Not even death. Just absence. A place where time stuttered, where the universe itself seemed unfinished. And in the center, waiting for us, he exhaled slowly. The things that had been erasing us. A cold unease filled the hall. They weren't invincible. But they weren't alive, either. We fought them with weapons forged from our darkest nightmares. They screamed, not in pain, but in something worse, recognition. As if they finally saw us for what we were. He clenched his jaw. One by one, my team fell. They knew we couldn't win conventionally, so they did the only thing left. His voice dropped lower. They let go. Of their names. Their identities. Their humanity. A pause. And that's when the enemy hesitated. The Vrax historian's tendrils twitched. Why would they hesitate? Voss's stare was hollow now. Because something looked back at them. A heavy breath. We don't know what we became in that moment. But they did. And for the first time, they ran. A ripple of shock passed through the assembly. Aliens who had mocked humanity's myths now sat rigid, eyes wide, as the unspoken truth settled over them. The Krylth warlord's voice was quieter now, almost unwilling. And after, Voss was silent for a moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was flat. The war didn't end. It just stopped. No surrender. No treaties. Just silence. Like they had seen something worse than themselves. He exhaled, rubbing his metal fingers together. We didn't chase them. Didn't try to understand. Because deep down, we knew. If we went looking for answers, we might not like what we found. The avian scholar swallowed hard. And the revenants? Voss's expression was unreadable. Gone. No records. No graves. Just a handful of us left to remember. His gaze swept over the silent assembly, to remind others why some myths should never be forgotten. No one spoke. No one laughed. The mockery was gone. Only the weight of something far more terrifying remained. The hall was silent. Not the silence of contemplation, but of something deeper, something primal. The kind that settled over battlefields before the first shot was fired. The Vrax historian finally spoke, his voice unsteady. You expect us to believe that humanity became something else? Voss didn't blink. Believe what you want. The Krylth warlord's claws tapped against the table, his earlier arrogance gone. If this is true, why has no record of this war ever surfaced? Why doesn't the rest of the galaxy know? Voss gave a slow, humorless smile. Because no one wants to remember. He leaned forward. Not us. Not them. And not the universe. The weight of his words pressed against them. The aliens who had mocked human myths now found themselves searching for reassurance, for some rational explanation. But there was none. The avian scholar's feathers twitched. And these revenants? If they truly let go of their humanity, what stopped them? Voss's expression didn't change. Maybe nothing. A shudder passed through the assembly. The Vrax historian's tendrils curled inward. Then why haven't we seen them? Voss exhaled. Because we don't look for them. He glanced upward, as if seeing something beyond the walls of the assembly hall. And if we're lucky, they aren't looking for us. Silence. Then, the Krylth warlord stood abruptly. His movements were stiff, his posture no longer that of a conqueror, but something closer to prey. Without another word, he turned and left. One by one, the others followed. No more laughter. No more mockery. Just hurried, silent exits as they processed the implications of what they had just heard. Voss remained seated, watching them go. Finally, only the avian scholar remained. He hesitated, then asked, "Is that why the universe is so quiet?" Voss looked at him, something unreadable in his gaze. "You tell me." Then he stood, stretched his aching limbs, and walked away, leaving the weight of unspoken truths behind him.